Right through history, the nude has figured in art. And the reason we identify so much with the figure is because it is us.
It's a genre that always reinvents and always has an interest because of its link to the human condition.
Welcome to Art. Yep, this is a series about the nude in art.
You've seen one bum, you've seen them all, really.
Oh, hello, welcome. My name is Hannah Gadsby. You might know me as a comedian, or you might not. But what you probably don't know is that I studied art history at university. I want to tell you a story about how, against all odds, bums, boobs and tiny peni were transformed into civilised, serious, worthy subjects, definitely not porn, through the magic of art. I'll be straight up with you, folks. This is a show about how weird we are. Are you a nudist?
Oh, that's exciting.
It's exciting, isn't it? For thousands of years, we've been obsessed with making images of bods in the nods. We just love nudes in art. But why?
Having a human body to navigate aesthetically is endlessly fascinating.
For me, looking in the mirror, you start to see the absolute absurdity of humanity and, whoa, have a go at us.
Over the next 2 episodes, I'm going to look at the history of the nude in art.
Yeah, so come in.
And talk to some incredible artists.
Boom, boom. Yeah.
Because they're challenging classic beliefs about the human body that ye olde art set in stone thousands of years ago.
They often say, oh, this is the history of the body.
It's like bells, you know, like...
Yeah, wouldn't that be great?
On the counter.
It is sometimes difficult to disrupt the narrative, but I do it anyway. What else has an artist got to do?
So hard to make sense of all the art. So many nudes. If only there was a tool to help me make sense of it all. There is. It's called the canon. Do you know what that is?
The canon is a story. It's a story that's told about which artworks are the most resonant and the most important.
Most people who decided on what the canon was and why these works are important, what they're saying about humanity, would take me as a low-class convict lesbian descendant, you know, like, as probably not making the cut of the canon of humanity, just not in here.
But the notion of a single oppressive canon has been questioned for so long now that I think most of us are attuned to the fact that there are many contending stories. And even when we encounter that classic art history 101 tale of Impressionism leading to Post-Impressionism and Post-Impressionism leading to Cubism, one can't really look at that story without knowing that there are other contending versions.
I'm going to be focusing on the history of the nude in art because it continues to exert such profound influence on us all.
There you go.
So, where did the story begin? This is the Venus of Willendorf, a really old nude from the very, very olden days. She's only 11 centimetres tall, but is nearly 25,000 years old. Whew, must have been a smoker with that growth rate. This little Venus is generally understood to be an object relating to some kind of weird womanly trickery like fertility and stuff. Oh, but her fatty deposits disqualified her from club canon. This is where the canon of the nude begins, with the manly men of ancient Greece. The great vision of perfection set the standards that men across the globe still strive for today. Good biceps, physical prowess, and most importantly, rock-hard abs. So you can thank the ancient Greeks for your low self-esteem, fellas. These nude dudes do not reflect the reality of bodily existence. They're idolised. Not merely mortal mans, we're talking about gods and heroes, men of action. They're throwing things, fighting animals, doing stuff, everything except washing up, and never ever disengaging the core. Coiling up, ready to chuck a plate. Crazy Greek wedding. Throw a spear. This is Zeus. Just thinking about throwing something engages the core. If you're a real man, Men don't need anything except abs in order to demonstrate their masculinity. They can just be abs. Absolutely nothing else is needed. What's this guy? Is this you?
Oh, this is
not you, is it? No.
No, this is a young guy that modeled for me.
This is Ben Quilty. He's an artist. A well-known one too. I mean, my mum likes him. Ben's shown an interest in the naked human form. I've seen it.
I did that welding myself, Gaddis.
You did the welding.
See that?
Like, I love how that's what you're proud of.
Yeah. Oh, look, this is the studio. Come in here.
Yeah, right.
Want some cake?
Oh, yeah, thank you. No, you can touch me. That was all a joke.
There's not a more vulnerable position to be in than having someone stare at you, completely objectify you, and make work about you and use you as the basis for that work.
My question here is, why is everyone naked at this party?
Well, I guess it's just like that's, you know, why not? You could be naked now and you'd be fine.
Would I?
Yeah.
Would I? Emotionally, I'd be fine. I'd be more worried about dust.
But at the core of it, for me, the naked form, historically, and now, more importantly, is about the vulnerability of all humanity, of who we are, of gender and sexuality and everything. The most recent big body of work that I did was the Afghanistan series, and asking those guys was really difficult and confronting, yes, very tricky.
For you or for them, or as a communication?
It was very tricky for me because I was scared of them. I thought it would be more confronting for them, but when they've just come back from a war zone, their body's such a vehicle, and the vehicle has carried them through a horrible situation, and they're quite happy to get their gear off.
Ben's soldiers are using the very same language the ancient Greeks built all those years ago. But unlike his predecessors, Ben does not show us heroes engaging their core to the bitter end.
We are always questioning the canon, aren't we? You are.
I am.
I do.
Yeah, we're not normal.
No.
His treatment of the body expresses a psychic vulnerability that was not part of the traditional canon.
The uniform's so much about, you know, camouflage and domination. Take that away and you still have that physical presence, but it's skin, and the skin's what's damaged by the bullet. First guy that I asked, Captain S, I'd spent a lot of time with him in Tarancot. He opened my mind to what a war was, to the horror of it. And it was confronting to ask the question, but as soon as I asked it, he literally started unbuttoning his shirt. I said, I'm not ready. Let's discuss this a bit more. I've got to prepare. And then I ran out of white straight away, and he said, is this like me running out of bullets? I said, yeah, a bit like that. Sorry.
You've done some self-portraits,
yeah.
Nudes. I've only seen one of them from memory.
I've only just got this mirror in here, and it's really impossible to do a painting holding a little mirror, full nude, but that's here for that reason.
Show me how you would, before you got your full length, how would you do the, and is nude?
No,
like,
because
you'd have to do that.
You can't do that. The painting would look, well, maybe you could, I hadn't thought of that. Well, I mean, if you're using a mirror and looking at yourself, I would suggest that no matter how fit and strong you are, unless you are a narcissist, except for those people, looking in the mirror at yourself, inevitably you go, my goodness, humans are ugly. We are really ugly. We have hair in weird places. We have skin that has no hair on it. I mean, we are not built for this planet.
Yeah, we're not built to look at ourselves.
We're all correct.
I mean, if we were supposed to look at ourselves, we'd have eyes on our fingers.
Yeah.
You know, like, it just doesn't make any sense to know what you look like.
No.
After the Greeks came the Romans, which was more of the same. Then for a good 13 or so centuries, the story of the nude went a bit quiet. In the Dark Ages, artists preferred to hide our unmentionable bits and bobs behind a bit of shrubbery. And now we go to the Renaissance. Magic of TV. The Renaissance is the most important, bestest ever art history movement because it had a gun publicity team who really made sure the brand stuck. The term Renaissance means rebirth, and in the case of the art produced at the time, it was the ancient Greeks and their Roman copycats that got the old born-again Christian treatment. The challenge for Renaissance artists was finding biblical stories that lent themselves to the ideal ancient Greek treatment. So a big fave was David and Goliath. Here is a David that Donatello turned out in 1435. He's the first full-length nude since Greek antiquity. "That's not a David, this is a David," said Michelangelo Dundee a little later. Yeah, here he is, David, one of the most famous nudes in history. We love him. Look at him thinking with his abs. Studying the human form was a real preoccupation of the Renaissance artists, who believed that ideal beauty was more than skin deep, so they peeled actual bodies. Cool story. And so began the long tradition of life drawing, the formal study of the nutty.
Well, life drawing became the centre of artist training from the Renaissance academies, so it was connected to humanism and the idea that the human body was at the centre of everything. So it starts being enshrined in artist practice very early on.
What does the nude for you express? Why is it so important?
It's the poetry of the body. It's, we talk about body language, don't we? The body can be expressive, you know, with a gesture, a position of a leg, an arm. The Greeks understood this very, very well in their sculpture.
So, with the process of learning how to draw from life, what are the steps you teach students from scratch?
We start with the bones, absolutely, with the skeleton, and we move then to the flayed figure, which shows the muscular attachments and so on. And then we move to the live model, and that can take a long time.
How long would it take me? I'm a bit shit.
My darling, it would take you as long as you had the energy and the courage to stand behind an easel with your hand raised, saying, "I will fight off the tiredness and I will draw what's in front of me."
I grew up painting and drawing obsessively as a child. I'm told when I was very young. I was obsessively interested in images and how they were constructed and how you drew things or painted things. My mother had to continuously supply me with acres and acres of butcher's paper, so that's all I did, made things out of clay.
Bill Henson is one of our best-known contemporary artists. He's been photographing the human body for decades.
I've made detailed copies of the Sistine ceiling, which I did when I was 9 or 10 years old, so I've got my own 6 foot by, 6 foot copy of the Last Judgment in watercolour and, lead pencil, and it's all I did as a kid. So I was saturating myself with history of art anyway, and it's just interesting.
You use the body a lot in the nude. Why?
Having the human body to navigate aesthetically is endlessly fascinating. It's at the centre of, how we understand ourselves and the world in which we live. And so for it not to be, a major preoccupation for any artist or artists, it would be unthinkable. And I suppose the more of the body you have to work with, the greater the possibilities for expressing not just ideas, but more importantly, emotions or feelings.
Most of the art we associate with the Renaissance was commissioned by powerful Catholic types. So how did they get around all the nudery? Like this. We need to talk about the tiny peni. Too many people think that the shrink is due to the fact that marble is a very cold stone. But no, the reason is because men knew they had to distance themselves from animals and not seem too primal, too virile or out of control. So the tiny flaccid penis in absolute minimisation was a safe bet. We hit a peni snag with Michelangelo's The Last Judgment, which covers the whole altar wall of the Vatican Sistine Chapel. It's a depiction of the saved and the damned following the second coming of Christ. But the nudity in The Last Judgment was controversial. The Last Judgment is all these writhing naked bodies that Michelangelo painted because he loved naked bodies. He loved them too much though and left the peni in full view of the Pope in his pulpit. And after a while they're going, it's too much penis for the sermons. They hired a bloke and said, can you just paint? And he did a bang up job, didn't he? It's like just waft some cloth over the peni and scroti. And so he saved humanity, basically, with all this waft cloth. And in the corner, you've got hell, but they didn't cover up the corner of hell. The peni are still there. They decided they didn't have jurisdiction over hell. Once they're in hell, peni, floppy out eye. Elsewhere in the world, nudity in art was treated quite differently. Eastern art in China, Japan, and India didn't really shy away from overt sexuality, and the idea of the nude body wasn't shameful. A philosophy embraced by young Sydney artist Ramesh Nithyendran.
Actually being able to study the history of Western art, there's often this really European-focused presentation of art history, so they often say, oh, this is the history of the body. The fundamentals is that it's completely idealised. I think what this presentation of this idealised male body does, it actually excludes a lot of different kinds of male bodies. In contrast to lots of Western sculpture, I guess from a similar period, Hindu sculpture wasn't as formal. The other thing which is interesting from a Hindu context is that the Shiva Lingam is like the key thing that they worship, and it's literally a giant phallic structure. What I've noticed is there's no real history of the representation of erections or erect penises in the context of the Western art canon. They always have to be kind of softly out of focus or completely flaccid or kind of represented with this like little leaf or thing of grapes covering it.
Yeah, only represented in autumn in a gust of wind.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, as an artist,
yeah,
are you having a conversation with that?
Yeah. I always think of my work as these kinds of idols of the future. I often look at like destroyed religious sculpture, and often like implicit in the way those bodies are represented is a very particular view around gender and the body. Kind of want to like present a kind of wacky, subversive, fun, sexy, naughty take on that. So my view is not to kind of keep the male body like legislated and sacrosanct and private, but to be able to thrust it into public space to kind of get those discussions happening.
So enough about peni and abs. We know his story. What about the female form? What's her story?
This is when beautiful happens as far as we're concerned. This is Venus. And people going, wow, what, a female nude? Yeah, keep that. Good decision. She's in the pudica pose. That means she's covering her boobs and covering her pussy, but not doing a very good job. The intention is what matters. She's trying to be modest, but we can still see it. And this is the Renaissance version of exactly the same thing. Same pose, she's being birthed. The shell, it's not a surfboard, it's a metaphor for a vulva. This is Titian's Birth of Venus. What is the difference here? He's value added to Botticelli's version. There, the vulva is now to scale. Okay, this is the first reclining naked lady female. It is hard to believe in this day and age that women haven't always just been having a narcoleptic nap in a field. No, this guy invented it. Giorgione, he's like, hey, Birth of Venus, she's out of the water. What happens then? She tries to get to town, but then a bit tired. It's been a big day. I've been birthed, had a bit of a walk. Oh, how about this nice cloth rock? I'm going to have a nap. What he's invented there is pretty much permission to look at sleeping women in the nude and not feel as creepy as you should.
One artist restoring dignity to these reclining women is Deborah Kelly. She takes the female nude out of the book and gives her a chance to move about.
Yeah, so come in.
Yeah, okay. Books. Where do you find them? Like, are they on the...
My favourite ones are on the side of the road.
Really? People just leave books on the side of the road?
Yeah, because everyone's throwing their books away because of Wikipedia.
Because they're so heavy.
And they're so heavy and they take up valuable real estate, especially in my house.
Deborah's work is a commentary on art history itself, and it directly challenges the status quo.
This is an encyclopedia of art by white men, basically. And I've been going through it, cutting out the naked women, and just seeing, you know, they were something. You know, the visceral experience of going through all these books, the hundreds of discarded books that I've acquired, looking at all these images, especially of the reclining women, and doing something that feels like a kind of rescue attempt, an attempt to imagine an alternative for those prone women whose whole job has been to be boneless and sexually available and vulnerable in a quite alarming way. It has made me really extra conscious of the contours and the roots and the scope and ambition of patriarchy, I have to say. But the book itself becomes this kind of interesting, like, archive, anti-archive.
The men didn't have much to say without women. It's quite a lot of holes in their argument.
Yeah. Boom, boom.
Yeah. When I look at your stuff, there's a lovely playfulness. Is that a conscious choice, or does it just happen with the process?
I'm a pretty clowny person, so
Yeah.
I can't help myself, even though I am really trying to impart important moral lessons. But I'm a clown, so what can I do?
So this is the Manet. No, this is
Titian.
George. Yeah, so
Giorgione or Titian.
yeah, and so because Manet did the sort of copy of
He
like
did.
two clothed hipsters with
Yes.
naked ladies.
Yeah, which I've been using together.
Ah, of course.
I've combined them.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make them have sex, actually.
The two women. That's is.
Yeah, it's like...
How do you get consent with collage?
Yeah.
It's toughy.
Yeah, so there's so many things that are tough about collage. But, you know, I've really gone down a lot of rabbit holes to end up trying to free naked reclining women from the pages of discarded art history books.
While Deborah cuts up images from discarded art history books to make her point about the canon, Julie Rapp uses fractured images of her own naked body to reflect on art history. In Persona in Shadow, Julie collages her own naked body into the classic female forms from art history.
So Persona in Shadow was a bit like a puzzle. I did the outline, stood in it, and then I took a photo of each section. And when I put it back together again, in order to keep the outline of the past correct, it fractured my body. So it was this thing, as much as you want to change, it's kind of immutable. You can't actually change history. You can only sort of negotiate with it, I suppose. Those works were done in 1984. When I had that survey in 2007, we chose to show the whole set of them, which was really interesting to see them again, because, you know, you're always thinking, am I going to really hate them, or are they actually bad? Or, you know, you don't, it's like it's something you haven't looked at in ages. And I found the nudity in that interesting because, well, some of those poses like puberty are quite coy, but I felt that fracturing was a quite strong element of it. It didn't feel brutal to me, you know, like cutting up the body. It felt more playful, you know, that you couldn't actually consume me in one sort of grab. You know, you had these bits that you had to try and put together.
Questioning the canon of the nude in art history is key to the work of Indigenous artist Brooke Andrew. Brooke's work shines a light on our colonial past and the way archival records perpetuate damaging stereotypes.
So people get confused about bodies, I think, especially coloured bodies. People still very much see Australia as one Indigenous identity that has one fixed body type. If you look like a particular type of Aborigine, which is clearly part of, a primitivist, ideology and imaging the Aboriginal body, people still have very racist set ideas around intelligence, around beauty and entitlement. And then when you're fair-skinned like me, it's even more problematic. Or if you look Chinese, like some of my friends who are Indigenous.
I noticed you've put Adam and Eve on their heads.
Well, I kind of needed to be turned a bit upside down. When I was a young artist, people would say to me, so are you Aboriginal or gay first? And it's kind of like, okay. So these are all kind of clever little funny representations and stereotypes of, people of colour. And I think that is a very interesting question because it's a way to subjugate and to define and keep silent identities. And I refuse to be part of that narrative.
By making these images larger, recolouring and renaming them, Brooke is forcing us to look closer at these ethnographic photographs. The scaling up gives us no room to see them as curiosities of the past anymore.
My work by practice has always been about playfulness and subversiveness and things that are not necessarily fixed. Just kind of juxtaposing these other narratives together that include the body as well. I went to art school in the early 90s, but it wasn't until I left art school that I started really diving into the archive. And so the man that's present in Sexy and Dangerous was my first experience of an ethnographic image from Australia. I didn't know that these images existed. I didn't understand the breadth of the power and the legacy of these images. I didn't know why they were taken. I didn't know the subjects' names, none of us do. And that in itself was powerful. And the man who's represented in that work has this extraordinary godlike, presence. And what I mean by godlike, I don't mean the Christian God or even the Hindu God. I mean, another word I would say would be ethereal. And he looks straight back through you. It was really about the power of the colonial gaze, as in G-A-Z-E, and how it, dominates and scrutinises. So it wants the body, but it also repels the body. So hence, Sexy and Dangerous.
Brooke is challenging the single way that bodies have been represented and described to us by the traditional canon of art history. It's a history that presents inflexible notions of male and female gender roles. Here's a case in point, The Knight Errant by John Millais, painted in 1870. At first glance, there's one story, the fairy tale of a knight rescuing a damsel in distress, but look closer. She's tied to a tree.
I am meant to believe that men and women are completely different species. Men are intellectual, they are rational, they get shit done, they have no vulnerability. She, on the other hand, women, natural, they need to be controlled, they get themselves all velcroed to trees and stuff. We need to help them and... Okay, that's next week, I've got a lot to say about this next week. Don't be frightened. If you're frightened, how do you think she feels?